Hello, world. Today we are talking to Adam Wilson, a senior product manager at a little company you might have heard of called Microsoft. What I loved about our conversation was how into the weeds we got about collaborating with developers and having the technical knowledge and know how to be a productive collaborator as a PM. We talked about a whole host of other things, including the challenges of working at a large organization. So I'm so excited for you to tune in and hear from Adam himself. Let's dive in. Adam, we're so excited to have you on today to share your wealth of product knowledge with us. I know a lot of folks, myself included, are really curious to hear about what it's like to work at a huge tech leader like Microsoft. So we'd love to just dive right into that. So what's a typical day in the life as a senior product manager at Microsoft?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So yeah, I would say my typical day, it's really just getting a product shipped. So I work on a product right now called Scheduled Events in Azure. It's where we tell customers that there's going to be an interruption to your VM because we're doing some maintenance in the data center. And so I guess we can just start with like today. How today started is there was a customer outage and we were trying to figure out, hey, was that something that we did? Like, did we take your VM down and cause this, or did was it something on the customer side? So it's me kind of handling that communication with the customer, and then I do have to talk to customers at their worst because nobody calls the maintenance guy because everything's going great with their week. But having that communication, setting that up, and also being able to talk with them and try and figure out an interface between our development team, their development team, saying, okay, maybe this one was us, maybe this one was you. You know, we didn't do maintenance on this VM right now. Can you check if something else happened? So yeah, we can start with having that customer interface. At the same time, I'm always anytime you're on a call with a customer, you're definitely trying to pull requirements out of them of what else could I do for you? What else is working? What's not working? Trying to gather that, and then of course bringing that all then back to the dev team. And of course, it's a big company, so there is a lot of internal coordination that comes back because I own my area, of scheduled events and sending those messages, but I'm not the one that actually schedules the tech to go in and do the maintenance. I'm not the one that decides what order we update data centers in. That's none of that is me. And so if I'm pulling a requirement out of a customer that's complaining, that's saying, "Hey, why are you doing maintenance on a Tuesday like at 9 a.m. when we know we're a trading application?" That's not it's then taking that requirement not back necessarily to the dev team I work directly with, but trying to influence the rest of the organization and be like, hey, can we not do that at that time, or is there a reason we have to be doing that at that time, and we can then maybe communicate that better to people. So yeah, I would say having worked at a very small startup briefly and also now at a large company, there's a lot more of dealing with internal sales, I would say, at a large company, as opposed to working with a customer and trying to like pull the requirements out of the customer. And then, if I'm the only product manager, then my product idea is the best product idea, by definition. And I can see Nick, that's the right reaction. It's not always. There's a reason there's a team, but when there's a team of, I think we're like 10,000 product managers in
Wow.
Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
My idea is not even the top 10%. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
lucky if I'm above median with an idea. And so it's, working that through with all the people involved.
Absolutely. As I love that you've had both experiences. Like you've done Microsoft for a long time, but you've also done like the really tiny startup. And I know we had a lot of fun together. What's
Mhm.
like surprised you the most about how they approach product differently?
I think if this was going to the startup, I was not ready for the difference in support around the product organization. So coming out of Microsoft, when I have, for example, a marketing problem, if I have a PR problem, if I have a sales problem, if I have a support problem, there are entire organizations of people who are specialized in that. And I only need to go talk to, our support expert. I only need to go talk to our support expert once, and they are very good at their jobs, and I can, brief them and get them up to speed on whatever the problem is and how they need to start working with customers around it. And that's it. You suddenly, on a smaller organization, you feel that, oh, right, like our support team was one poor guy answering the phone calls. And, that is a very different experience. And maybe it's me having to get on a support call, or maybe it's we just have to do an FAQ and I'm writing it myself. So it's not having that support system around you. You take it. I started my career at Microsoft, so you take it for granted having all these people, having all these experts, where it's if I write something, it's going to go through 8 people who are professional editors before it goes out to the public. Whereas at a startup, maybe Nick, maybe you took a look at it. If I was lucky, otherwise we just published it and hope for the best. So yeah,
Mhm.
I'd say it's the big support structure around you.
Yeah. Did you did you like kind of being closer to the metal there, so to speak, or is the support structure like really like does that free you up to focus more on product problems? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it had pros and cons.
Mhm.
Getting on a support call is something you should do no matter the size of your company. Even at Microsoft, there's a system where every few months we can get on support calls and just sit with I think it's tier 3 they stick us with. I actually don't know what level, but it's not the front line. It's like one of the higher level, like more senior support people, and you just sit on calls with them and listen to them helping customers with your product.
Mhm.
So no matter the size of your company, you need to be integrated and talking to customers all the time. But at the smaller company, there's a lot more. Like I was doing a lot more what I would consider kind of tier 1 support of, my credit card number I didn't type in my credit card number right, that sort of thing. And I honestly kind of missed having someone else who, but by the time you've done your 4th or 5th call of the day where it's like I didn't type in my credit card information right, you're like, all right, okay, guys, let's let's do it. Whereas I wouldn't have to do that necessarily at my current role.
Mhm. Gotcha, gotcha. How
Yeah.
do you were kind of touching on it there, but how is user research sort of systematized? It's you're getting on support calls. Are you doing like big like user research kind of activities, or like what? How do y'all kind of get that voice of the customer in there?
Yeah, so there's actually an entire user research organization, and they put out. I actually don't know the cadence, but they put out fairly regular reports of surveys of thousands of customers, and they'll go do 100 interviews and 1,000 surveys that go out, and then present that data back to the entire product team, and that'll be pretty broad. It'll be kind of broad strokes of, do I like my VM on Azure? Do I like my SaaS product on Azure? Like that's kind of the scale because they are obviously doing research on behalf of the entire company. So there's the broad industry trends, the broad product trends feedback that we get. And then there's also the just straight, I get to go get on the phone with a particular customer that's having a hard time with our product, a particular customer that's maybe deeply engaged with our product. And I will go reach out to either their sales team or if they have a dedicated support team, I'll reach out to them and say, hey, can you get me on the call with a couple of their engineers? And that's how I can go gather that feedback for the very specific part of the product I want. But that's more one off. There's not necessarily the surveys on my specific product, which makes for a bit of an interesting experience actually, because coming to a smaller company where you're responsible for the entire product, any customer feedback is customer feedback for you. Whereas when I see a survey about how well people like Azure, there's maybe one question that applies to my product, and even sometimes it's even you have to kind of squint and say, well, they're talking about support, and that's kind of maintenance, and therefore that might be me. Whereas, you know, when we're at a startup, it's everything's me. So yeah, it's a different experience, but again, it's nice to have somebody who is good at statistics doing the analysis for you because you don't make stupid mistakes. Which, yeah,
Yeah, I imagine, and it sounds like you get a lot of noise. It's like just a fire hose of just feedback. How do you like do that squint and get the signal out of all that information?
so I've actually found, and maybe this goes against what my employer wants me to tell you about how to use AI, but the way I found it is if I look at the AI summaries of like, we get 1,000 survey responses back, and there's 1,000 verbatims in there. I can't read all of them, so I will look at what the AI summary says that are the most common topics, and then
Mhm.
I'll actually go and read 50 or 100 of them. It doesn't, it takes a couple hours. It's not the end of the world, and I'll actually read what the AI thinks that feedback mapped to. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can get a feel basically for, okay, the summary says that they're complaining about planned maintenance, but they don't actually mean planned maintenance. They're saying maintenance that they think we planned but was actually unplanned for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's little subtleties like that. uh, Also with my product name is scheduled events, and so anytime anyone mentions the word schedule, the AI immediately thinks it's my fault. And so having that, basically that ground truth of, I read through 100 of these and I know that, oh, when they're complaining about scheduling, it's not actually it's a completely different scheduler. It's not me. Or when they say, the other one that gets me is, there's something called the instance metadata service that some people misname it as. And so again, I can say, oh, when someone's saying instance metadata service, they actually mean scheduled events, and that's feedback I should read. So yeah, that's kind of the balance of, you've got a ton of information, so look at the summary and then figure out what that summary maps to. It's the
Mm-hmm.
best way I found.
Yeah. I think you hear a lot about AI taking over work for people, but it's good to hear that people are still doing work out there and actually digging into what is happening. Kind of coming like zooming out a little bit more.
Mhm.
How is a typical product team organized at Microsoft? Is it, I'm assuming it's very engineering heavy because that just sort of clicks in my mind with my perspective of y'all. But it sounds like 10,000 product managers. I'm sure there's design, there's user research. How do you all typically kind of orient yourselves?
So it depends very much on what kind of product you're building. So the
Mm-hmm.
product I'm working on, our end users are all developers. So we actually don't have a designer that's assigned to work with our team,
Mm-hmm.
because they they would be very bored, because it's all just like API design.
Mm-hmm.
So we're a little different in that case, but typically what will happen is you have one product manager who works with a group of developers, and that group of developers will grow and shrink over the course of releases as you, as a product manager, you decide, hey, there's this big initiative that we need to invest in. You get momentum on convincing the developers that you need to invest in it. You convince leadership you need to invest in it. You've got the data coming back from customers and from the research teams that you worked with that say, hey, you need to invest in, we think we should invest in that. So then that number of developers you're working with grows,
Mm-hmm.
and you work with more developers. And then sometimes the reverse happens where your product is deprioritized, and now there's only 5 developers I'm working with. And so it ends up being really dynamic. And a lot of the book they hand us all on our first day is called Influencing Without Authority. Uh, and that's entirely it. Is I'm trying to there is a set of user researchers that are assigned to my larger product group, which is Azure,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a set of data scientists, and there's a set of developers. And as a product manager, your job is to convince enough of them to work on whatever you're working on to get that product shipped.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's
but yeah,
fascinating.
so
Mm-hmm.
and then as far as reporting structure goes, which is something I really think Microsoft does a good job at. Other things that less good at, but reporting structure works out really well, is that PMs, devs, user researchers all report up very different chains up
Mm-hmm.
until fairly high up. So we're talking, massive organization, CVPs, executive vice presidents, those people. So they're 6 or 7,000 person organizations. That's when that reporting chain starts converging,
Mm-hmm.
which means that when you're trying to talk to a developer, or you're trying to talk to a product manager, you've got to convince basically 3 different leadership chains that this is a good idea. So it really forces you to get your ideas put together, and not just, you work with the same people every day, so they all have context and they all think this is a good idea. It really
Mm-hmm.
forces you to go, hey, like, I know the dev VP has not looked at this area in 2 years closely, so I'm really going to have to make sure that I've got my requirements doc is together, all my customer information is together, everything, my proposals all really buttoned up before I try and bubble it up, because otherwise they're going to look at this and say, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's such a good practices in general, but it's great that there's like a almost an implicit forcing function, right? To like really force everybody to get to that level of quality. I want to touch on like the developers kind of growing and shrinking a little bit. One thing that
Yeah.
we've run into is like you think that adding a developer to a team or multiple developers like will linearly increase your productivity, right? But in reality, that doesn't always shape out, right? Because of the
Mhm.
complexity of managing different people and different talent levels and things like that. Has that been your experience, or how do you account for that as you're doing this sort of planning?
Oh yeah. Oh, huge. So actually, to give you an example, we're working with right now is we actually have a bunch of new college hires who are joining the team in the next few months of the summer. So
Hmm.
they're kind of trickling in over the next couple of weeks.
Right.
And because of that, we've actually for the next few months taken one developer, the equivalent of one developer out of all of our planning, like velocity and sprint planning over the next few months because we're like, hey, they're smart people, they're smart new developers that are coming in, but they've got to learn the version control system. They got to learn how to run the tests. They got to learn how to set up and tear down a development environment and all the other things that come with being a developer. And so, yeah, it in the short term, it definitely getting new people on your team, it brings down your velocity. There are definitely people I've worked with at Microsoft who are very, very good, and they'll bring down your velocity, but they'll bring it down for 4 hours while you ramp them up.
Hmm.
Versus other people who also more junior people, they just take longer to ramp up. They don't have the experience. They've not necessarily worked with the system before. It takes them a bit. So yeah, no, it's definitely not a linear ramping. I think Windows had one of the when I worked on Windows, it had one of the most like obvious ways of calculating that I've ever seen in my head, which is they said each developer. There's 4 weeks in a month. 1 week is for things that come up. So you're only allowed to schedule 3 weeks of the month. First of all, for developer time, that fourth week is just for meetings, things that come up. And then on a given week, you can only schedule the first 3 days of the week. The last 2 days are code reviews, they're for tests failures, they're for build failures, they're for any kind of, again, any kind of administrative overhead. So, through there's 3 weeks in a month, there's 3 days in a week, and we were only allowed to schedule 3 out of 6 months. The other Now this was a packaged software Windows thing is that 3 months were development, and then we had to do 3 whole months of what we called stabilization, trying. Folks have used Windows. We weren't 100% successful, but trying to get every single bug out of the system that we could. So we did code for 3 months, stabilize for 3 months, and then we could ship, and then code
Hmm.
three, stabilize three. So yeah,
Right.
as far as like as you add more developers, it is not linear. It's I'd say it's log n if I had to guess.
That's probably pretty close. But it's so interesting to hear because I think a lot of people in startups feel that, but they don't have the repeat exposure to it because you're not scaling up and decreasing a team.
Oh yeah,
So it's fascinating to hear from your perspective. I think part of the challenge is the coordination, right? It's just like getting all the people rowing in the same direction. How how are you all able to shift these huge initiatives? Like with such a large team, it boggles my mind as sort of a startup kind of serial startup person that you
yeah.
all can get moving in the same direction like that. What does that process sort of look like?
Yeah, actually, what I want to add a correction to my previous answer, which is I was saying it about dev team ramp up. It's the same with the product team. It's the same with every other engineering, every other
Mhm.
group in the engineering organization. It's not just devs. I'd say it's more obvious on the devs because they tend to have like the strict ticketing systems, whereas
Mhm.
PMs user interviews. It's not we don't have quite the same ticketing system, but yes, you're ramping up and scaling your PM team. It's log n as well. I bet if I had to
Mhm.
guess.
That makes
And
sense.
that's exactly why is because as you're saying, I got to coordinate. Let's say we're doing a large initiative. Trying to think of a recent one we've done. Oh, we're trying to find a different way to deliver different information in scheduled events for our customers. We wanted to tell them a little bit more about the type of maintenance we're doing. If in order to get that working, it was across, I believe, 6 different teams. We had to get 6 different teams, 6 different PMs lined up, and their associated developers. So it was probably about 100 people working on it at a given time. And comes down really down to that influencing of authority. So it's some of it is one-on-one conversations with people, trying to convince them, hey, this is the feedback I've got from customers. This is what I'm hearing. This is what I think we can do. I think we can either win a bunch of new customers. We can put ourselves in a better position competitively in the market. I think we can win a particular contract. That's worked with me sometimes is, hey, like we've got a single very, very large deal a 9-figure deal or whatever that's hung up on a couple features. This is one of the features. I think we can land it in time for this deal. So it comes down to finding that leverage point that you can convince someone that this new product, this new initiative, whatever it is a good idea. And it comes down to also having more than one for a single product, because some people, if you tell them, hey, like there's a really big contract that's hung up on this and we think we can make a sale with it, that's going to resonate. That's going to immediately for them. They're going to be like, okay, yeah, jump in. Like, let's get this going. Other people are going to say, well, but that's only one customer. And, we have tens of thousands of customers on Azure. What is everybody else saying? Or you'll get some other people who will come in and say, and this, the architecture on this, you're going to force a weird architecture. How are you going to deal with like a layer violation where we've got different layers of Azure that are talking to each other that shouldn't? So how are we going to work around that? So knowing your audience and having a bunch of different ways to frame why this is a good idea is really what it comes down to. And again, that's why I was talking about having, potentially 3 different management chains in each product group, but now also different product groups are involved. So having different ways to sell it is huge. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and just sometimes I call it PM force of will. Just, can you as a PM generate enough excitement, generate enough energy, get people wanting to work with you, wanting to work on this, that they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny. I think when I talk to like fresh PMs or PMs who are, a little less experienced, they don't realize how much of the job is sales, right? It's effectively like, I need to generate all this buy-in and I need to coordinate all this kind of effort across so many people. They think it's like, oh, I'm going to write PRDs and everyone's going to see this as gospel and it's a good idea and we got to do it, right? And startups, sure, that happens a little bit more, but I love how explicit that story is of like, no, there's so much communication and collaboration and syncing that has to go on. And I love the idea of doing a tour. Like, we got to lay the groundwork here. We can't just show up with a big idea. We got to talk to people, hear the rebuttals. I think for me at least, like, and you've probably seen me do this, like I try to talk to all the key stakeholders before I pitch an idea. So I can hear like, what is the valid criticisms of what I'm thinking and sort of factor that in and make the proposal even stronger than it was at the beginning. Do you have like a set practice for doing that? Or is it simply like, I'm going on tour, I'm talking to people and we're going to get there over time?
Not a set practice. I have a few guidelines. So actually I had my first manager, maybe my first couple months of being a PM many, many years ago, made me put a Post-it note over my monitor that was, you're selling optimism. Is you got to come in, no matter what you're doing, you got to come in with an optimistic view of it. You can't come in with a pessimistic view of whatever you're doing. So that's step one. And then as far as the procedure is, my kind of rule of thumb is if you've got more than about 10 people in a meeting, which, it happens, you better know what almost every single person in that meeting is going to say if you're the one who called it. So if you're calling a meeting of, 15 people because you need them all to line up and say, yes, our teams, get the head nods from every single one of them. Yes, our team is going to do the code. Yes, our team is going to check this in. You better know what every single person in that room is going to say before that meeting starts. And we're mostly hybrid now. So, when I was in the office, that was literally, I would walk between buildings, stand outside of people's offices and chat with them for 10 or 15 minutes to make sure I knew. Now it's give them a call, ping them on the chat, whatever it takes, just to make sure that going into that meeting, you don't want to be surprised. It's okay if like somebody at the last minute forwards it to their manager or forwards it to somebody else. And now it's this 18-person meeting and they're surprised and you don't know who they are. But you better have all the other 15 people lined up ahead of time. And this is just a ceremony of like, okay, yep, we all agree. We're all seeing that everybody else agrees. Because otherwise I've done it where I don't line up people ahead of time. And 15 people all trying to express different opinions on a call is it's entertaining if it's not something you want done. It's kind of a dark entertainment for an afternoon, but it's not going to get you anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be pretty brutal. I've definitely been on those meetings as well. I love selling optimism. That's such a powerful, I think, mentality to have because I think me putting on my engineering hat, sometimes I have to be the bad guy and I have to be like technically that's not going to happen, but it's I try to make it work harder if my PM is coming to me with that cheery optimism, with that, that framing, as opposed to like, guys, this is a stretch, I don't know if we can do this. And so
Mhm.
it's funny, it's one of those, like, soft skills that no one's ever really explicitly focused on. I don't think I ever learned that in college, but it really does make such a difference when you're collaborating as a team.
Yeah, 100%. And also, when you, as a PM, when you come to your dev and you say, "Hey, I think we should do this. This is the kind of thing I'm thinking about." That first few developers you talk to, you got to keep it so broad and just let them have the flexibility to brainstorm. Let them have the flexibility to come up with ideas, because I kind of know the system. I could probably draw a box diagram of how half a dozen of the different parts are laid out, but I don't know all the details. I don't necessarily know if, the tracking ID ends up in a particular database. And that makes a huge difference for design, right? If I can track this item or I can't. And so that initial conversation with the developers, uh, I I've called those documents all sorts of different things over the years, of Adam's stupid ideas, Adam's crazy ideas, things like that, where it's like, hey, this is what I think we could do. And then you just go to the first dev, and they're like, no, you can't. You're like, oh, all right, well, okay. But you see what I'm going for. And then you can have that back and forth of, okay, well, we actually have this option that would work, or that option that would work, or we could get
Mhm.
80% of the way with this trick, and having that conversation.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and not being attached, especially as a PM early on. Don't get attached to a design. It's not going to work.
And
They're all bad.
I love that you're calling that out, because I've seen PMs who have a tendency to be prescriptive, who are like, not only have I identified the problem, I see the vision for the solution. I've even had some folks like pick out the technologies that we're going to use, and be like, this is the way it's going to be done. And then they bring it to the group and it like crumbles, like, because they get the feedback, and it's just not, what they were hoping for, and it doesn't go that way. How do you, if you were coaching like a junior PM, how would you help them like fight that instinct to be prescriptive?
I think I think unfortunate is something we don't have to coach a lot, because it kind of gets kicked into you pretty hard early on, because the devs at Microsoft and devs I've worked with are so experienced.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, one of the things just to think about is that, exactly that, is that, especially as a junior PM, there's a lot of that system that you don't necessarily know, or you're not living in that code. And I know, especially with, if you're working on a smaller product, I've had this tendency where you're working on something where my background, I and my undergrad were both in software development, so I am fairly familiar with code. I code on the side for fun, so I think on a smaller product, I'm like, I can look at that and go, oh, I kind of know how that works. I kind of know how I'd add that. You got to put that in the back of your head of, I'm not the one that's going to have to maintain this. I'm not the one that's got the experience on this. I'm not the one that wrote this code. And I might have an idea of how it should work, but that idea is not necessarily correct. And that idea is not necessarily the end all be all. And as far as like what the customer wants, that's where you kind of can be the expert on. And sometimes I would say there's been a few times in my career where the developers have actually had really good insight on where the customer is, but typically that's not how they spend their day. And so it's a bit of that, where it's, you don't necessarily expect the dev to come back to you and say, oh, I ran a bunch of user interviews and this is what I found, when you present a design. And on the reverse side, when you present an idea to a developer, don't tell them what the architecture should be. There's a little bit, yeah, stay in your lane a bit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love that you brought up your technical background, because it's been very apparent as we've kind of been talking that you're operating with a really high degree of technical literacy. And I think that the product you're working on sort of demands that. How have you, not working in a technical role, sort of cultivated that over time and kept sharp, and developed that fluency to go and talk to people, and developers?
Yeah. So I think it started when I was within my first year of being a PM. This was what they assigned the new. So I should give you a little background. Microsoft didn't have product managers for a very long time. Our title
Mm,
was program manager, and we were
mm,
expected to do everything from doing customer interviews and coming up with the PRD, all the way down to triaging bugs. And not only triaging bugs, when someone reported a bug, we would have to come up with, write a sample app that came up with a, like, reproduced the bug,
wow.
and then you would hand that off to the developer to fix the bug, and then all the way out the other end of marketing and writing documentation and everything. So very on in my career, I think I don't know if necessarily every new PM got assigned this, but definitely the ones on my team all got assigned. Basically, we've got a customer bug report and they say such and such isn't working. Can you write an app that replicates that bug?
Wow.
So I got a very early start in my career, basically writing code to replicate customer problems. And then because of that, I was actually very fortunate. We had a security bug, and I ended up basically what happened was a customer reported that they had a security issue I was working on Windows Phone at the time, that somebody could edit their banking app without their control, which is obviously horrifying for us on the team. We're like, this was terrible. And because I had spent so many hours writing sample and demo apps, that I could actually like read what the customer was saying was happening and very quickly identify, oh, they're making these API calls in that order, and that's why this is happening. And we were actually able to get a bug fix out in under a week, after once I had seen it, versus we had the team previously had I think they'd been looking at it for a couple weeks, the security team, and they couldn't reproduce it, and then they pushed it to us, and we were like, hey, yeah, no, this is like, boom, we can fix this. And so having that experience early in my career basically said, you need to be technical. You need to be able to stand with whatever other team is looking at your product, looking at your code, and you need to be able to code with them. You need to be able to. Now, I cannot keep up with an OS dev. OS development is a whole nother beast. I will one day, maybe if I have enough time, I can possibly learn that. But like the app development side, because that's what I was working on. I was working on APIs to develop apps on Windows Phone and Windows. I need to be able to code with those customers. I need to be able to understand what those customers are saying. And if that means on Friday afternoon, I spend 4 hours writing a stupid app that's never going to see the light of day, then that's what I do. But yeah, it's been a conscious effort, and it's been a critical part, I think, of being able to do my job, is being able to stay technical, or at least, I think I described it to my dev lead once as, you don't want me writing production code, but if I did, I would be as bad as a university hire.
That's great. I love that. Gosh, that's such a powerful story, and I think a lot of times we hear from non-technical people, it's like, I want to get more technical. Like people, I think, are genuinely like, I want to understand this world, even if I can't write it like production ready, like you said. I just need to wrap my head around it. Do you have any specific like advice you give to people who are like, I want to understand how code works. Where do I get started?
Now I'm thinking way back to when I started coding a lot of years ago.
Yeah.
Actually, let me talk about it. It was definitely only 2 years ago. Yep. Very young. But I think the way I started was, there was something I wanted to do and I wanted to solve. And because of that, I knew that I could solve it with a program, or I thought that I could solve it by writing some code. And so I learned just enough to, limp my way across the finish line and accomplish what I was looking to do. And for me, every new language I've learned, every new skill I've picked up since then has been a variation on that. Actually, the most recent thing I learned is I had my first experience programming with like an AI Copilot pair programmer. Oh wow, that was quite a few months ago. But I started it, but I've been working on it, and it was because I needed to write new sample code for the product I'm working on. I needed to write sample code, and I was going to sit down and write it myself. And I thought, well, might as well try the new thing, try it out. So I hadn't done any AI programming prior to that, but because I had a project I was working on, because I had this very clear end goal in mind of that I had to get some new sample code out for some customers, then yeah, this was a good chance to go try it out, see what happens, learn a new skill. And now I'm not going to say I'm good at it, but I have done it. And I can also, again, because my job is shipping APIs to developers, when they start talking to me about how now they code with Copilot and everything, at least I have a little bit of empathy with them. I can understand what they're saying, where they're coming from, kind of a little bit more about what their experience would be, as opposed to having not had that experience.
Absolutely. That learn by doing mentality. You got to get out there, feel it with your hands. And I am 100% in agreement. That's if you want to learn code, if you want to get better at this stuff, you got to practice it. Otherwise it's too abstract. We were touching on this a little bit earlier, and I kind of want to get back to it. when you work, I think for like a Titan like Microsoft, there's a Microsoft way of doing things. I imagine, right? Do you ever find that limiting, or is it actually like really really helpful for being a PM?
I would say it depends on the part of the Microsoft way of doing things. There are definitely things that I would say I feel like, oh, I wish I could just get this shipped, or I wish I could just do this way and not have to deal with, for example, the overhead of, we have a lot of overhead as far as our work tracking system of, if I'm requesting some work from another team, I have to make sure that I have the right paperwork filed and that it's marked as committed by them, and that, the change history in our ticketing system is correct and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yeah, that's a pain in the butt. And I sometimes wish I didn't have to do it, but I also know that, like, I would say going down to, unless you're the sole product manager and there's only, 4 or 5 devs, any organization larger than that, you're going to need to basically have some communication and some formal way of saying, yes, this is what we're working on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I understand it. There are also a lot of ways where it's freeing. It's, I would say, so I worked at a startup and I went back to Microsoft. Coming back to Microsoft, suddenly you can have conversations about, well, maybe we just build a data center there. That is definitely not a conversation you can have at a 30-person startup of, well, we could just build a new data center. Whereas being at Microsoft and being the Titan and having that kind of market power and having that kind of organization behind you, suddenly that is a very reasonable thing to write down in your spec as a solution to a problem, is something like that. So yeah, it's got its ups and downs. And yeah, it definitely gives you some time when you're brainstorming. You've got to kind of step back and be like, well, hold on. I have a very large organization here. Is there something else we could do that maybe just doesn't sit within the scope of the 100 people I talk to on a monthly basis?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you're saying at the end there, where just thinking a little out of the box. It's a whole world of possibility that's there. I think where I've struggled with that in the past is like just having visibility, like knowing if I only knew what the team next to me was doing, like it would unlock so much potential and so many things we could do. How do you like cultivate that visibility in an org that's so big?
I'll let you know when I figure it out.
Yeah,
It's
right.
there are ways. We have a fairly regular internal cadence for sending out, teams send out updates of what they were working on the last quarter, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a bit of that, but at the same time, there's hundreds and hundreds of teams within Azure, and I can't keep track of what all of them are doing. There are teams that I know are working on things close to us, or that I have a friend who's in that organization, and I'll have regular one-on-ones with them that are basically, I would say, 10 minutes of how you're doing, how's your family, how are your kids, and 20 minutes of, so what do you do actually these days? What are you up to?
Mm-hmm.
Anything fun? Anything over there? So
Mm-hmm.
that's one way I found that works. Just occasional check-ins, reading the newsletters. But yeah, I have definitely on more than one time in my career been blindsided by finding out that another team is doing something and going, oh, I didn't know that. That greatly impacts how I would be doing what I'm doing today.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, you just sort of always have to keep your head on a swivel and make sure you just keep talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was thinking a little bit more about what you were saying with your like Windows experience, where
Mhm.
if I did the math right, the developers get 9 days a month of productive time if if they get three
Yeah.
days a week to like work on net new stuff, right? And so I think what we run into even in startups, right, is like developer time is such a finite resource. It's like we get so many hours in a week, and we've got this huge backlog of stuff, and we just need to have it, be as productive as possible. How do you approach collaborating with developers to maximize their ability to just get stuff done?
So, yeah, there's a few things. Actually, I don't know if you've read Joel Splotsky's blog, Joel on Software. He was in
Sounds,
Microsoft. Pardon?
sounds familiar. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. He was a PM on Excel. He also has done Trello and Stack
Mhm.
Overflow. So he's done a few things that have turned out well in his day.
Mhm.
But I really got a lot of my ideas from him, and then working at Microsoft, other PMs that are kind of similar directions, which is, first of all, give developers blocks. So if you're ever scheduling time with a dev, look at their calendar and try and like put your meeting next to another meeting. as best you can, so that
Mm-hmm.
they can leave that big chunk of time to think, because that's huge from myself writing code, but also from talking to people I've worked with, is if you can have 4 hours to sit down and actually like think about a thorny problem, really load all that context into your head and start writing code, that's going to be your most productive, rather than having 4 1 hour chunks throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
So as a PM, be aware of that. If you're try to keep recurring meetings to a minimum is the other thing, is give them the space, let people work async where you can. If there's a spec review or something that needs to be done, have everyone put comments in for the week before or the 3 days before, whatever it is, and then only once everyone's done that, then you can have the review and just address the comments. So hopefully, make the best of that time. And then the other thing is keep the pipeline full. Is keep talking to customers, keep talking to the developers. Make sure that the developers have a way of knowing what you've heard from customers, so that they're never surprised by anything. And then make sure that as soon as they have a chance to finish what they're working on, get the tests done, get the whatever it is, the integration, get it shipped, there's something waiting for them to pick up and start thinking about. And even as I'm sure there's some people who disagree with this, but like the last couple steps of the development process, when you're doing the integration testing and you're doing the last round of that, there's some time for your mind to wander. There's some time to, think about what's next. And if you have that as the PM ready to go, so that, while your dev is constantly rerunning their integration tests because there's a flaky failure and they can't track it down, they can also have in the back of their head what's going to be next and start thinking about that and start coming up with some ideas there. One other thing that has worked really well for me in my career was the dev team did stand-ups 5 days a week, the 15-minute stand-ups, and then partway through they switched so that Tuesdays and Fridays stand-up. They didn't do stand-up status anymore. They did what have I learned. And so in that case, like I came in as the PM, the data science people would come in as well. And we'd go around and we'd have the same 15 minutes for stand-up, but we'd go, hey, what did I learn this week?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it'd be, whatever customer I talked to and whatever I'd heard from them. Data science people always had something fun they'd pulled out of our telemetry. There's always something exciting in telemetry. And, the developers, a lot of the time it's, hey, I was poking around in this library and I realized it has a function to do XYZ that I didn't know about. Or, I learned a new technique or something. And having that twice a week really kept everybody on the same page and on the same, basically moving in the same direction, so you didn't lose momentum between features. Because as the PM, I kind of knew where my developers were exactly in the cycle by talking to them and what they were thinking about. But also for the developers and the data science people, they had heard me talk to, my 2-minute summaries of customers for 7 weeks leading up to a spec, for example. So it wasn't new information to them. They were rehashing this thing that Adam's been telling me for weeks. By the time the spec comes out, they're bored. They're like, oh yeah. I heard you talk to them. I don't care. Yeah, that's good. Let's go. Let's talk about how we're going to solve this problem.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that worked really well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just let them have big chunks of time. This is kind of my number one tip for all new PMs.
Mm-hmm. I think as a developer, that's all I ask for. Big chunks of time. Yeah. Get into the code there and have fun. But I love what that practice of just sharing what you're learning. Like so few orgs that I've worked in do knowledge sharing well. And it's a problem that gets worse as you scale, I think, for sure. But like just starting with something so simple like that, like tell me one thing you learned this week. I'm going to go to all my teams now and go do that, because I think it's just, I get goosebumps. Like it's just such a fun way to keep the team like connected, keep, it's sort of work focused, but it's not necessarily material to everything you're doing. And I love that idea that you're sort of front running all the work that's coming down the pipeline by sharing those insights. I think it's what an incredible practice.
Yeah. It worked out well. We had a few really good features that came out of it. One was a very junior dev was poking around in a library that we were starting to use in our code. And this was, poking around, and just mentioned that he learned that the library was using an MD5 hash function. And he just pointed out, I learned that they're using a non-standard MD5 hash function, so it's going to behave differently in these circumstances. And just all the heads in the room just snapped. Like, wait, what? This is not using, like, why is this library not using standard libraries? Like, well, you can't be doing security stuff, like hand rolling weird security stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's that kind of thing too. Whereas, as a junior dev, you might not know that how horrifying of an idea that was, and why the whole team immediately spent the next week ripping that out of our code. But just by mentioning that, he had learned something cool, he thought he had found a really cool hashing algorithm in our code, and by sharing that, suddenly it's like, okay, wow, we've prevented a fairly serious security issue and made some fixes, and everyone learned more about hashing this week. So yeah, it's I can't recommend it highly enough as a system.
Yeah, I love that. That's you're giving me nightmares now thinking about
Oh yeah, just
that.
right now, every library you've used, just make
Yeah,
sure it calls the standard one.
right, exactly. I'm
I'm
like
never getting
the
caught by that one again.
mental checklist now. Like, have we used that recently? But goodness, that's what a huge find. That's
Yeah,
amazing. And I
and
think
and
like, oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, yeah, and as a senior, like the more senior you are, you're never gonna check like, oh yeah, obviously they're calling the freaking MD5. Like, why would you not call them? Why would you not call the standard one?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Right. That's
yeah.
sort of
Sorry.
the blessing of like being sort of a novice and naive about things and poking at it versus the
Mm-hmm.
jaded senior dev. Like
Yeah.
you're spot on there. Kind of like thinking about those like practices and like those ideal rituals. Like if you were to like have a magic wand and like put together your dream product environment, knowing what you know about Microsoft and sort of the startup space, like what would that look like, and how do you think y'all would be able to like ship a feature from like idea to production?
Yeah. I think definitely, like, coming from my idea, I would not. I very much appreciate having the Microsoft organization doing the research for me. That is such a wonderful resource that we have, and that I'm able to do is have someone else pull, not only necessarily pull the large scale resources, but also when I want to talk to a customer, because I'm going through the sales team, it's kind of fun. I have my own scheduler, because the sales org is the one who has to, the field org are the ones who schedule those meetings. So
Mm-hmm.
having all of that support and getting the information in is something I've missed at a smaller organization. I think as far as development goes, one of the things that was nice of working at a smaller organization is we could let things slip that you couldn't slip at Microsoft. Like, for example, I spend an inordinate amount of time worried about different compliance with different contracts, and Microsoft has a whole bunch of legal obligations because of different things that have happened over the years. On Windows, we had a bunch of consent decrees we had to deal with, right? Being free from that and being able to, not have to spend 3 or 4 weeks at the end of every release cycle checking off all the different legal compliances, making sure we're disclosing new protocols correctly, making sure we're disclosing our security. We got all our security disclosures ready to go. So yeah, if I could have all the resources of Microsoft to get the idea for me, and then none of the obligations during the development process, and we could come up with an idea working with the dev team, and they could just sit and they could write the code, and then immediately go back to having all the resources again. Because for me, when I want to get a product out there, get a new product feature out there, I'm able to send out a blast to our field team via, they have some training channels, etc. And suddenly I have a couple thousand sellers that all know about this new feature and are selling this new feature for me across the world, which is something I could never scale to. And so, yeah, basically having the huge organizations on the front end and the back end, and then kind of in the middle, just back to not having to worry about those things, would be ideal if I could figure that out somehow.
That's a good magic wand to have if you can, if you can figure that one out.
Yeah.
I think kind of focusing a little bit more on like your story a little bit. When did you like realize that this technology thing is going to be important for you personally, but also like for your career trajectory?
I think I actually don't know if there was ever like a moment. So I originally actually took tours in university assuming I was going to study physics and I was going to go be an astrophysicist. And then I wandered into the engineering building and they were building robot cars. And I realized that's more fun. I'm doing that now. Was sort of the entire very detailed thought process that went into that. And then I realized, you got to build, if you want to build robot cars, you got to know how to write the code for it. So we're doing software. And yeah, that was kind of there. And then once you're in, studying as an undergrad software engineering, it's like, okay, yeah, I better technology is going to be a big part of this going forward for me. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I don't think there was ever a moment, as more as just a kind of a journey of, I would say, stumbling my way into ideas. Um, and even like, I was very fortunate with Microsoft, kind of stumbling my way into that out of school, getting hired to start doing, well, at the time, program management, but product management at Microsoft. Uh, right out of school was a huge opportunity. Also, to learn from very experienced PMs immediately was an yeah, amazing
Yeah,
experience.
absolutely. I feel like there maybe recently or the last 5 years was a big there's a big crop of PMs that came out that were sort of like minted and founded at startups, and they didn't have that sort of leadership from folks who've been doing this for a long time, and you sort of saw this. I don't know if it was bad practices or bad habits, but things got a little looser in the PM space. Uh, as you maybe have run hiring and you've seen more PMs join your org, have you noticed anything like that, or is that just me? Like my spidey senses are a little off.
I think it's more that we wouldn't necessarily see that on our side because it's very much beat into you, into the culture, right? Like,
Mhm.
welcome to Microsoft. I'm glad you've got startup experience. We really want your creativity. If you want to get another team to do work, this is exactly the process you follow because,
Mhm.
you know, there are 999 other people who are doing it this way, and you do not get to be the special snowflake. So a lot of that kind of that bad habit stuff, because we're a large organization, very quickly gets filtered out of people. Now, we all have our own bad habits internally, but
Mhm.
we at least all have the same bad habits. So there's a bit of conformity there. So yeah,
Mhm.
I don't necessarily know that we've been seeing it on our side as much,
Mhm.
just purely because of the structure.
Sure, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And kind of thinking about those incoming PMs, do you have any advice you would give to first-time product managers who are just getting started?
A few things. One is make sure you're friends with your engineering team. Make sure that you chat with them, you have a good relationship with them, because if you lose, I've heard it referred to as flipping the bozo bit. If your dev team thinks you're a bozo, you're done. Right? That, as your ability as a product manager to ship things, is completely neutered because they're going to immediately question any feedback that you bring them, any customer insights you bring them, anything. If they start questioning that, then your ability to function as a PM is gone. So step one is to win over the trust and of your dev team. They don't have to think you're the greatest PM in the world, but they have to at least trust you and be willing to work with you when you bring something back to them. So that's building that relationship. And then the next thing is finding out how you can, especially in Microsoft, how you can piggyback on other people's customer interactions to learn more. Because as a PM, that's your bread and butter, right? Is getting talking to customers, working with customers, getting that feedback from customers, helping customers with your product, marketing to customers, evangelizing to them. So the more you can piggyback on, a senior PM is running a workshop with a bunch of our uh, like top users of a product, or they're going to a conference to present, or they're going, sometimes we'll do site visits. We're going to a site visit with a customer. The more that you can get involved with that and understand how the more senior people do that, the better off you're going to be, because that's where you can differentiate yourself. You know, there's a lot of PMs who are very good at I heard it referred to as blocking and tackling, the you know triaging the bugs, the grooming the backlog, the once you have the customer feedback, turning that into a refined PRD. You know, there's a lot of PMs who can do that. It's the really good ones who can get out to enough customers and pull out that information and get the good information back for their dev team, that puts their dev team in a position to succeed and puts their product team in a position to succeed.
Absolutely. Well, I hope all the young PMs listening and follow that advice because it's fantastic. Adam, is there anything that you want to share with the audience before we wrap up here?
Oh, I don't think so. I think it was great to chatting with you. I think
Mhm.
got a lot of got a lot to talk about. That was some things I haven't thought about in a while too, as well, because
Mhm.
you kind of get in the rhythm of being at a company and you just do the same thing, and you don't really think about it from the outside very often.
Mhm. Absolutely. So hopefully it was fun.
Yeah,
But I know it was an absolute pleasure for me, and thank you so much for
yeah.
coming on.
Thank you for having me. It was a ton of fun. Take care.